dioxide and NOx were, there was all this discussion about the acidification of lakes in the New England area because of acid rain. So they said, okay, we've got to do something with sulfur dioxide emissions from all the coal-fired power plants in the region. And what happened? People said, businesses in those regions said, if you do anything to try and reduce those emissions, what's going to happen? People are going to lose their jobs. So what was the trade-off? And you see this all the time, even today in arguments about climate change issues, carbon dioxide. If we put any restrictions, it's going to cost jobs. Is that a false choice? Is it really an issue of if you regulate and protect the environment, it's going to be harmful for the economy? And it's not clear that that's always the case. But that's the #1 argument used. Do you want to have a job and die at 60? Or do you want to have a job that pays a little less and die at 90? I mean, you've got these trade-offs. Would you rather live in LA today or LA in the 1960s? Right? There were much fewer environmental laws in the 60s that affected LA. Do you like breathing the air in LA today or breathing the air then? Okay. So, the air has been cleaned up significantly. Is it clean? No, but it's been significantly cleaned up. So the issue here is, you know, you talk about like putting in the Three Gorges Dam in China. What was the trade-off there? The economy got top billing, right? Because they wanted the power. And so damming Three Gorges, they had to move whole communities. And it wasn't like, hey, let's take a vote, we've got this nice new place for you to go and live. It's like, okay, you guys pack up, Tuesday we'll be here, you're moving over here, right? So the economy received top billing with Three Gorges, and the environment and society were just casualties to that development. Now, China can now claim that they have renewable power source, right? So it was good for the environment, because now they're not burning coal, they're using hydropower. So the emissions from hydropower versus a coal-fired plant, but what was the impact on the free-flowing water and on the dozens of communities that were inundated? So this is always an issue of what is the weight that each gets. And this, like I said, was from this Johannesburg Summit in 2002. Now, focusing on economics. What we're looking at here is this idea, you have standard of living versus quality of life. When we look at sustainability, you know, the way I like to think about it is like a newspaper reporter. You've got issues like, what are you going to sustain? Who's going to do the sustaining? Where are they going to sustain it? When are you going to sustain it? Okay? How are you going to sustain it? So you've got all of those basic questions they teach reporters to ask when you're doing an interview. So the what are we going to sustain is an issue that economists have looked at. Do we want to sustain a particular standard of living? And you heard a lot about your generation will be the first generation that will be worse off than your parents, right? And that's in the concept of standard of living, not in the concept necessarily of quality of life, right? So from the quality of life perspective, it's much more broad than simply looking at standard of living and saying, gee, are we producing the same amount of goods? Does everybody have 3 cars and 6 garages or whatever? All right? So from an economist's perspective, we look at the world through what's called a production function. So society is going to produce some set of goods. And you've all had resource for this looks familiar? Basically, what you're saying here is you produce a certain amount of goods, and this is a function of. So we're using these inputs to produce this output. And these inputs basically are here. You're going to combine human capital, physical capital, and natural capital. Right? And when we talk about natural capital, we've got renewable resources. What's an example of a renewable resource? What?
Solar power.
Solar power. All right? Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal. These are renewable. Then we have exhaustible resources. What's an example of exhaustible?
Coal.
Coal, fossil fuels. All right? Things that you extract from the ground, use them once, and they're gone. And then E, the environment, which can be land, air, and water. I just didn't expand out the notation. So how do we use the environment? We discharged air. We had air emissions, discharged water streams to do. And we talked about fracking in here already. And you can see how fracking can get into the underground water system, so you can have it contaminate an aquifer source that may be the drinking water of the community. So all of these resources are combined to produce the goods and services we use. So that's how an economist would look at standard of living. So this Q could represent gross domestic product. And what we would be concerned with standard of living is making sure the gross domestic product per capita remained at a certain level. Okay? So that's if we use the standard of living. Quality of life is a much broader concept, and we need some kind of welfare measure. What do we mean by quality of life? You've seen reports of these happiness indexes. You know, the concept that money doesn't make you happy, just allows you to search for happiness in more places. All right? So these measures on quality of life include the economy. They include the environment, the environmental quality. They include education. Right? So it's a much broader concept. And this is what international organizations like the World Bank and UN are trying to come up with measures. And economists are working on trying to change the GDP measures to what are called green GDP. So it takes into account the depletion of natural assets, the contamination of your air quality. So if you looked at, say, Saudi Arabia, their GDP per capita would be very high. But that doesn't include their drawdown of their natural asset by pumping the oil. So once you account for losing the oil that they're pumping out, so their reserves are diminishing, their standard of living or quality of life is going to go down. So green GDP is another concept that can be used there. All right. So in ecological economics or environmental economics, we have the concept of strong sustainability, and you've talked about strong sustainability, I think, versus weak sustainability. The way economists look at strong sustainability focuses solely on that category of natural capital. Right? So our natural capital stock next year has to be at least as big as it is this year. Right? So that idea that we can't diminish our natural capital stock. So if we can't deplete the natural capital stock, does that mean we have to stop pumping oil? Because any oil you pump is then gone, consumed and used, then your natural capital stock has to have been depleted, right? So the question becomes, natural capital, physical capital, and human capital are treated as complements in this. Because if you deplete one, then you're going to end up getting less of everything else. Now, the way we can still grow and still